Tired of tile countertops? So am I. Here's how to get rid of it. Skip the demo, just coat over it. All right, today guys, we're gonna be showing you how to prep a tile kitchen countertop. We're on the project with a local contractor. They're transforming this tiled countertop kitchen and they're gonna make it look like a solid slab of concrete. There's a certain way we wanna prep going over tile if you're not ripping that tile off. And today we're gonna go over every step, how to prep it, whether you're doing a concrete overlay counter kit or an epoxy countertop kit. You wanna prep them the same way. They didn't have anything on these edges, right? So they were just bare edges. You could see where the tile stopped. So they came in, they put a piece of wood here, glued it, nailed it. So this is nice and stuck. So we don't have to really worry about the faces. If you have tile on your faces, you can either Bondo those grout lines or you can just pop those tiles off and resheet it with a piece of wood like they did in this kitchen. That's really simple to do. Probably faster and easier than trying to Bondo all your edges and make your corners nice and rounded. The next thing we want to do is scuff the tile up. And a lot of times tiled counters have uneven tiles next to each other. So we never want to coat over that. We want to get it as flat as we can and get rid of the smooth gloss layer of the tile. So we want to get down into the porous surface of that tile. And the way to do that is using diamond cup wheels on angle grinders. Probably the worst spot right here, I think it is. This is really high, kicks up, this tile kicks up, so we're gonna definitely wanna grind that. Again, we're trying to get it as smooth and flat as we can before we flood coat it with epoxy. The biggest thing is make sure we're holding this thing level and flat. Notice how it's nice and smooth. There's no gouges. I didn't dig in anywhere. The second thing is you can tell where there's a high spot. Right here you can see this is completely grinded to the edge. And then we have a spot right here that's a miss. So that tells me this is still a little high here, which isn't a big deal. We just want to get rid of any spots that are really sticking up because we're still going to flood coat this with resin and that's going to level it out. The other option to prepping and leveling out the top is you can Bondo all these grout lines. It's just a lot more work. We found that flooding it with epoxy is a lot easier. It gets it a lot flatter because trying to Bondo when you're going over multiple grout like sections, it's almost impossible to get it perfectly smooth. You got to overfill it so you can sand it and it's flush. So again, you can Bondo all these if you want. Best way to do it is what we're going to show you today, and that's just Bondoing our edges where the wood is, any nail holes, any seams on the faces, edges, and then we just flood coat the top. Makes it really simple and fast. It's always good to round your top edges. You never really want to go over a perfectly square edge. It's more prone to chipping. It doesn't cover as well. So when we sand this, we'll kind of round these edges just a little bit. If it's epoxy, epoxy is very vital that we get these faces, any nail holes, any imperfections on the faces filled, because the resin doesn't go on as thick in the face, and you'll notice those spots. Overlay, we do multiple coats. It's a thicker product. It's just different, so we don't have to worry about it as much when we're doing concrete overlays, but we wanted to show you obviously everything on prepping a tile kitchen, whether you're going over it with overlay or epoxy. They are bringing the concrete overlay up the backsplash. It's going to be all seamless, very, very cool look. But we want to address this gap. Now, if we were just doing epoxy on here, not doing the backsplash, obviously you're not going to bring epoxy vertical like this unless you're coating boards flat and then gluing them up. So we're going to tape, fiber tape, crease it, fold it halfway on the counter, halfway up the wall, and then when we flood coat it, that'll lock this bottom in, and then when they run the overlay up the wall, that'll lock that other fiber tape into the wall. If we were just doing epoxy on this top, all we would do is just do a paintable latex caulking to fill that gap back there. That way we're not losing resin on that back edge. Just make sure it's a paintable latex caulking, and our primers will bond to that. So I'll point out a few things. If you were doing epoxy overlay, it's not as crucial, but we kind of have a little lump of the Bondo here. Like I said, guys, overlay is a lot more forgiving on your faces because it just goes on thicker, it holds better. If this was epoxy, I'd want to sand this little lip down a little bit more. But since we're doing overlay, that's fine. And again, we're just checking, making sure all the seams are filled, all the seams on the top are filled. Now the sink is set in with the tile, so can't really take that out without damaging stuff, so we're going over it. Can't really prep the back here because we're going to wind up ruining the sink if we try to grind in there or sand or something, so we just clean that really well. Our primers bond to smooth surfaces, so that's about all we can do back there. And then we taped the sink. Always tape high, don't tape right down to the edge. And again, this is kind of a different scenario here than you would typically see, just because the tile goes right into that sink. Primer dries quick, about a half hour to an hour. We got a fan on there. I mean, it's ready to go. It's probably been down for 20 minutes. So I'm gonna go over mixing the epoxy. Now, when you guys are flooding it, we just recommend doing 3 gallons per 50 square feet. That's gonna give you plenty of product on the top, no matter what type of grout lines, how thick, how deep they are, and it's gonna be enough to just flow over that wood edge so we can kind of encapsulate everything and create a nice level surface. To minimize the resin flowing off and kind of letting it set up, same thing we do with our stone kits. We're gonna tape the edges a little high, creating a dam. We're gonna flood it, let that set up for a half hour, maybe an hour, and then pull the tape, brush it on our edge. That way there's not as much product flowing over the top, from the top to the floor. And it's really simple, just wait till the primer's tacky. All right, so we got the counter dammed off, resin's mixed up, so now we're gonna dump it out. We just wanna make sure we don't dump too much out in one spot, so I'm just gonna start pouring beads down the middle, try to keep it even. Obviously, this is a lot wider than the other counter, so this is gonna take more resin. So what I'm gonna do right now is just mist the surface with denatured alcohol. That'll pop any bubbles. And then we'll give this a little bit, pull the tape, and let it coat the edges. Been about a half an hour. The easiest way to check it is find a spot, pull your tape back, and then you can see how it's kind of slowly moving down. Right, we could maybe wait a little bit longer. You just don't want to wait too long to where the resin doesn't want to flow down and coat your edges. So we're going to pull it now, brush the resin in on our faces, and then just kind of let it drip until it sets up. And then once it starts to set up and stop dripping, we're just going to shave the bottom with a putty knife. That way we don't have to sand the drips on the bottom. So I'm gonna point out why it's best to resheet the face with a piece of wood, especially doing this process, is because you can see the grout lines right there, and then it kind of flattens off from us filling in the seam on the edge. Because if that grout line went all the way to the edge, the resin is gonna run down there just kind of like a funnel, and it's gonna pull a lot of that resin off. So by resheeting it with the wood, it basically creating a dam for that grout line, and that's gonna hold the resin up on all the edges. So we highly recommend, even if you have tile on your faces, pop that off, resheet it with a piece of wood like we did on this, and that'll make your edges look really good. The next thing, if you were doing epoxy counters over this, you can simply put the epoxy over it. You already have the primer. You don't need to re-prime, as long as you do that within the 24-40 hour window. And then if you're doing overlay, we do want to scuff up the epoxy before we do our concrete overlay primer. Sand it 120 grit, 100 grit, just scuff it up really quick, and then we can apply the concrete overlay counter kit primer onto this. But if you're doing epoxy counters, simply just go right over this the next day without primer. So like I said before, guys, last thing you want to do is scrape the drips off the bottom. If you don't do it, you'll just have to sand those flat. It's obviously a little too runny. It's not set up enough to have it not drip again, but I'll just show you. It's really simple. I like to use a thin putty knife, and we just run it under the bottom here, and that's gonna knock off all the drips. And when it starts to set up, you're almost just kind of cutting it off, so it works really great. Don't use a paint stick. Use something sharp and skinny like this putty knife here.